There is so much that has been said about Star Trek Nemesis since it debuted in 2002, which is just bonkers. I remember, like the other few, I remember going to see this film in the cinema, but I also remember this was after we had moved house, which was like this massive thing in my life. So it was in the new area where we lived, and I went to see it with my friend Darren in 2002, and we both quite enjoyed it. We enjoyed the run-up to the film, where its own website was there showing promotional material. I remember spending flipping ages waiting for the trailer to load online. Yes, children, there was a time before broadband. As a 14-year-old, I enjoyed it. My opinion was not shared by not the overwhelming majority, by a lot of the audience. And Nemesis is a flawed film. But I do have thoughts on its legacy, which we will get to when we come to the temporal observations. So, the best thing to do is to dive right in to all of the ups and downs for Star Trek Nemesis. Coming through with our first up of the film, you knew it was coming. It's a slightly bittersweet up though, it's for Jerry Goldsmith. This was not only his final Star Trek film, but his final film that he scored. He passed away, leaving an incredible legacy of music behind him. Obviously, you know, we have continually shouted out his music for the Star Trek franchise, but like, look at his work for Planet of the Apes, his Oscar-winning work for The Omen, and also, if you want to be deeply unsettled, his work on Alien as well. And that's just to name but a few. Jerry Goldsmith was one of the greats of film composition and composition in general. I think he went out with a blinder of a Star Trek soundtrack. Nemesis has a fabulous score, one that was like bootlegged a lot before an official expanded score was finally released, like relatively late. It was more than 10 years after the film was released before we got the full soundtrack. And there's so much gold on this. But from that opening set, from the Remus theme, it's good, this one. It is good. Our first down of the film, it's gonna go to that backwards E in Star Trek Nemesis. It's sort of a catch-all down in a way. There was a lot of creative decisions made for Star Trek Nemesis that I think have contributed to the overall negative reception of the film. Do you know what, actually? I'm gonna take this opportunity right here to remind you of something, and that's how trilithium downs will affect the count. As you know, a latinum up is a super up, and a trellium down is a super down. A dilithium up is something so good it removes it down from the down counter, whereas a trilithium down is something so bad it removes one from the up counter. Why would I take this opportunity to remind you of that? Well, we'll get there. I will come through with an up though for Romulus itself. Lovely to see it. It wasn't the first time that we'd seen Romulus in Star Trek's history, but it was one of the more detailed looks. You know, we did see it in things like Unification, for example, but with a bit of a film budget. I just love that pan in. It looks really cool. This would be reused, I suppose, spoiler for the temporal observations, but this would be reused again, updated, but reused for Star Trek Enterprise's 4th season. Another definite up here is that little snapshot of a view inside the Romulan Senate. I love the setup, I love the payoff. Some things obviously we'll get to in the temporal observations, but Senator Tour, it's just because it's such a normal day, even though we must support Remus and, you know, I beg you and everything, and that reminder of the military does not dictate actions on Romulus. Since when? But anyway, and then they leave and we get that, Jerry Goldsmith just coming through with a big drum pounding in our ears as that Thalaron radiation rains down on the Senate. It was a hell of an opening to this film. It set the mood. This was gonna be dark, and in fairness, it was. You know, there are many things that Nemesis maybe doesn't do very, very well, but setting the mood was not one of them. We're going to a wedding! A long-awaited wedding. So taken up to the Riker Troys. Oh, this was a long time. I enjoyed it then. I enjoy it now, because again, this is something that there's over a decade of payoff in this scene. And not only that, but taken up, you get some nice threads. Not introducing the threads. I mentioned this now in the ups and downs for Insurrection, that though they were introduced in that film, they feel more iconic in this film. Particularly because there's so many goodbyes going on all around us. As you will see, I'm modestly only giving myself a commander's rank, you know, because also the White Captain's one was a bit hard to get. But I like this one. All right, I think that Robert Blackman did a great job when it comes to redesigning this. And in fact, not to plug a video, but do check out our list of all of the uniforms ranked worst to best and see where the Nemesis and Insurrection dress uniforms land. We also, in Picard's speech, which I think Patrick Stewart delivers brilliantly, we get our first name of the Titan. Gosh, I wonder if that will become important later on. A couple of quick ups, and although they're just cameos, it is lovely to see Will Wheaton back here in Star Trek again. There's a funny story where he found out quite late in the day that he was actually going to be in this film. He bumped into LeVar Burton. LeVar Burton then spoke to the filmmakers. The filmmakers then got in touch with Will. Anyway, it was all like really, really quick. So quick that when Will asked screenwriter John Logan, you know, so what's Wesley's story? Is he still a traveler? John said, we don't have time to address that. Okay? And it shows. I mean, because in the film as released, he's just sitting at the head table. Lovely to see him. There is a deleted scene where he does get to speak, and Picard does say, it's nice to see you in uniform again, and then goes on to say that he's going to be assigned to the Titan. So it definitely seems in Nemesis that, you know, he's given up his traveling ways and he's back in Starfleet. Probably for the best that scene was deleted when you think where his story has gone since there. The other up, of course, being Whoopi Goldberg's cameo as Guinan. I am, however, going to give a down to a very conspicuous absence. Majel Barrett is in the film. She voices the Enterprise computer. Why would Lwaxana Troi not be at their wedding? I will give some allowance for perhaps she was going to be at the ceremony on Beta Z, but when you already have Majel Barrett in the film, frankly, I could say the same thing for missing Pulaski, missing Kyle Riker, but Lwaxana seems like that's a really big oversight on the script's part. And another down that I'm going to bring in here, because we get Michael Dorn speaking here at the wedding. Obviously you get a lot more as the film goes on, but down for the decision to digitally lower Worf's voice. We didn't need it for all of the Next Generation. We didn't need it for the 4 films he was in before this. We didn't need it for Nemesis. It was again, a creative decision I do not agree with. One decision I do agree with was Brent Spiner singing. Taken up, Blue Skies. Nice to hear you for the first time here. Worf might disagree. We're up on the Enterprise E, and the Enterprise E is looking pretty nice. Nemesis is clearly filmed in a different style to both First Contact and Insurrection. Well, it had a different director. Okay, we're going to talk about Stuart Baird. Down for Stuart Baird. He made a perfectly competent film. I just don't think he made a very good Star Trek film. But there are still many bits of it which are still very Star Trek. I mean, it's very clearly a Next Generation film. It's not like he took the characters and put them in this completely bonkers, you'd struggle to call this Star Trek kind of scenario. I don't think it went that far. I just think that there was a brief that he worked to, but I don't think advice was as new. You know, there is the stories of Jonathan Frakes was there on set, and, you know, but no advice was ever sought. I mean, he directed the last 2 films, and while Insurrection perhaps didn't do too well in the reviews or particularly in the box office, he was still very, very experienced. I mean, obviously, I dream of a universe where Frakes directed this film as well. There were some decisions that I think worked. For example, the Enterprise E bridge is put on gimbals for the first time, and I think that's actually a really good decision. And other things which I don't think worked, like some of the aesthetic changes, which are a little bit pointless in my opinion, which I'll kind of talk about as we're going through. More so it's the stories that have come out since. You know, LeVar Burton revealing that Stuart Baird kept calling him Laverne and thought Geordi was an alien of some sort. I don't believe you have to be a Trekkie to direct Star Trek. I do think you should do your homework. I suppose in slight defense of the man, Marina Sirtis did say that while Nemesis sucked, it didn't suck as bad as Insurrection. And in fairness, Jonathan Frakes gets Star Trek, so praise? Anyway, up on the Enterprise E, which as I say is looking pretty good, you have that sort of joking conversation about Worf is refusing to appear at a traditional Betazoid wedding, which, as we all know, you gotta go Starkers to. You know, it's all very good nature. I like this. You know, it takes a few moments to go, these people know each other. Actually, on top of all of that, Nemesis, you don't have that why is Worf here question about this film. You know, this comes after the end of Deep Space Nine. Worf is possibly still the ambassador to Kronos at this point, but he's gone to a wedding and he's going to the next wedding. Perfect sense for him to be there on the Enterprise E, as opposed to the previous film. Worf, why are you here? Do you care about the reason? Come on, Worf's in the film, that's why. Yeah, all right, fair enough. So yeah, I'll give him props for that one. Now we get the thing that brings us to the Kalaran system. A positronic reading, which can mean only one thing. Data, do you have another brother you haven't told? Oh, you do? Oh, all right, okay, cool. It's exactly what I thought it was gonna be. All right then, cool. So off we go. I'm gonna say it up. I like the Argo. I do, I like it. I think it's good fun. Is it extraneous to the film? Absolutely yes. Is there any need for it? Absolutely not. Do I enjoy it? Yes, I do. We get some good gags in here. You have the bridge, Mr. Troy. Again, this works so well because the cast clearly know each other so well. And I am actually going to defend screenwriter John Logan a little bit as well, because he's a decent writer, more than decent. I mean, like, he wrote Gladiator and also wrote the Penny Dreadful series, which I really enjoyed. And I do think that there was a lot of potential in this script. So I don't want this review to come across as if it's just like, right, how much does Sean hate this film? Because I don't hate this film. It just does have downs. But I do want to give credit where credit is due. I do think John Logan did a pretty good job writing overall what we got. I think it was executed maybe, not as intended. Some unsafe velocities later. I mean, again, the Argo's fun. Anyway, some unsafe velocities later on, we come across the first piece of what will turn out to be B4. Down for the Sapia Tone planet. I don't know, I just never have liked the look of that. So we find the different bits of B4, and again, I do want to give credit where credit is due here. Pretty quickly, they're like, oh yeah, no, this is dodge. This is not on the level. And I like that we don't get to the reveal of the head, for example, and then they start to think, ooh, this maybe isn't good. And, weapons out. I'm on board with that. What I'm not on board with, down, redesigning the tricorders, redesigning the hand phasers. I have never liked these ones. The Nemesis phaser, I think, is just quite lifeless. And the tricorder probably makes more sense. Probably is what a tricorder would look like. And you see things later on in Picard, for example, which seems to be a bit closer to this. For me, personally, I've always liked the flippy thing, and it just felt like a bit of a change for change's sake. They start getting fired at by the Kalarans. We get that line, why does he have a shiny head? I'm on board with that one. As, of course, they get back to the Argo. I don't hate it. I remember reading a contemporary review, and I do apologize because I cannot for the life of me remember what review this was, but it said, Star Trek does James Bond by the Argo driving off the edge and into the back of the shuttle Argo. Yeah, I have to say, 20 odd years later, I remember that, and it's pretty accurate. In the cybernetics lab aboard the Enterprise E, which is dead handy that it has one of those, I'm giving an up to the fact Crusher gets a line. Gates McFadden really got sod all to do in these films, didn't she? Sort of especially little in this one. It feels like she was written in because Crusher's there, as opposed to here's really important parts of the plot. Now, she explains a couple of bits of the plot as it goes along, and there's one scene which has aged very well when you think about what we now know about Beverly Crusher. But like, up, she gets something to do in this scene. Down to this film and the previous 3 films' lack of use of Gates McFadden. But through this scene, we get the reveal that, the android's name is B4. Nudie and Son's penchant for whimsical naming continues. That works. He's a prototype, he's not as sophisticated, it's Data. Grand. Anyone else a tiny bit disappointed it wasn't Lore? Just me? Alright. Up, because Ellie is standing off camera with a phaser and she's promising to shoot me if I didn't give an up to the Janeway cameo. Oh, Janeway was always getting an up for this one. Yes, Vice Admiral Catherine Janeway, freshly returned from the Delta Quadrant, makes a cameo here in this film. This was fun. This was fun. It seemed like it was so clearly recorded at different times that Patrick Stewart and Kate Mulgrew were like nowhere near each other for the recording of this, but it's not the point. The point was that this was great. Yeah, you get Janeway in a grey shouldered uniform. What seems to be, because you kind of can't see the back of her hair, but it seems to be, have we gone back to the bun? Sure, why not? And the 3 pips that we would see her in later on in Star Trek Prodigy as well. She sends them on the assignment out to Romulus, which definitely isn't dodgy at all. Yeah, the fact the Enterprise E just happened to be close to the neutral zone. Come on now, Starfleet. We get tiny little bit of exposition. We hear about this character of Shinzon, who was alluded to in that, beginning scene with Suran. We know he's Reman, and this was exciting for audience in 2002 because we had never seen the Remans. We'd known since Balance of Terror that there were at least 2 Romulan planets, but we knew nothing about Remus as a world. And so this was pretty exciting. It leads us directly into that briefing scene in the observation lounge, which also, because this is the last Next Generation era film, I think it just bears repeating that this observation lounge is a redress of the last surviving piece of the Enterprise D. It was the only set that hadn't been destroyed after Generations. And yeah, I don't know, it just feels nice. Everyone's there, this is all fun. We get our slight little explanation that Remans, they were used in the Dominion War, so hey, shout out to the Dominion War, that basically they were cannon fodder. They were only sent into the most extreme ground assaults, that Shinzon himself, all we know is that he led 12 campaigns, all successful in the war. So we're dealing with some serious battles here. All right, it sets us up. Probably they shouldn't have done that. Fierce warriors are the Remans. Yep, unbeatable. Yep, they win every campaign they do. Let's see how that one goes as the film goes on. Down for approving the memory download. I don't know. For me, and I suppose it's hard because I'm not watching this in... I mean, I know how the film goes, but it just seems that, was this not a bit of a rushed thing? I know they do shout it out. Geordi literally says, I can't believe Captain Picard gave the okay for this. Neither can I, Geordi. Neither can I. And we get that exchange between Geordi and Data where they go, B4, maybe this is what B4 is meant to be. He is meant to be just a prototype. And Data struggles with that a little bit because, of course, we know Data has spent so many years trying to be more than he is. A scene I quite like in this film, and is an up from me, is the reveal that, when we next come back to the captain's log, that the Enterprise E has been waiting in orbit of Romulus for 17 hours with their hails going unanswered. And finally, Worf recommends raising the shields and Riker agrees with him. It only took 15 years. Up. Now, even though they don't raise the shields, Worf was 100% correct, and I'm glad someone backed him up at last. This leads to a couple of quick ups. The reveal of the scimitar is an up. Seriously, I like that design and the way it decloaks kind of a bit at a time. And an up as well to Ron Perlman. Yeah. You want somebody to be an imposing baddie, you get Ron Perlman. And you do. And it's brilliant. Well done. Down to the vampire look. Maybe this sounds a bit harsh, but yes, we get it. Remus, you live in the dark one half. They didn't need to be Nosferatu. I think it's a little bit too extreme. Saying all of that, the introduction of Tom Hardy, boom, taken up. I think he's brilliant in this film. I really, really do. And, it's obviously easy to say that now because we know where Tom Hardy's career has gone since. Back in 2002, he was fresh-faced, young actor just starting out in Hollywood. And look, I don't want to go too much into it, but the failure of this film hit him hard. And I think that was so unwarranted and so unfair. And my heart went out to the guy, because he clearly gave his heart and soul into this role. Like, every scene that he's in, you can tell he is doing it for the back seats. And even when he's quiet, he's doing it for he's really, frankly, if you're playing Picard's clone, you want to be a bit Shakespearean in how you deliver that, don't you? And it's really, really good. His reveal of he can walk into the light, but the Remans have to back out of it. You know, we see the Viceroy pulling back. This slow measure of speech here. Obviously it becomes quite uncomfortable, but his approach to Deanna and that, may I touch your hair? For a moment you could almost wonder, is this maybe in innocent ignorance? He's obviously done his homework. You know, he knows them by name. He tells Data to scan him without subterfuge. And of course, it's all about him and Picard. And although we as an audience are like, so Patrick Stewart and Tom Hardy are two different people, quite clearly. Not only separated by age, but also the fact that they are two different people. Whereas Picard goes, that's me. You know, he straight away, that recognition is there on his face. You know, when Shinzon pulls out the knife to offer Picard a bit of his blood, there is a move for protection, but no one was worried that this scene was going to end in an attack. And yes, very quickly, Crusher confirms the fact that Shinzon and Picard have the same DNA, right down to the aggressive strain of Shalloth syndrome. What I wish this film did differently was reorder some of its scenes, because almost immediately, you know, you see that Shinzon's a baddie. You know what I mean? You could have played with the audience's expectations a little bit. You know, the Remans, which so obviously look like villains, okay, are villains. Shinzon, who is the clone of Picard, and is he possibly the evil twin? Sort of works out to be the evil twin of Picard. It's all a bit surface level. And by which I mean that after this great introduction where things are calm, they are measured, we get the scene with Donatra and Saran in the Romulan Senate. And although Dina Meyer, by the way, is brilliant and is absolutely an up from me, look, I've been a Starship Troopers fan forever, so I think she's brilliant. It's just a bit quick, isn't it? That reveal. We get a couple of important plot bits here. For example, Shinzon's clearly in pain, Donatra notices. The next thing, B4 suddenly wakes up, petting Spot, by the way, up Spot, of course. But yeah, wakes up, B4 goes toward a console. Right, so it's all about evil twins, is it? Still kind of pissed it wasn't lore. There's a list on TrekCulture where we talk about great scenes that saved, the title is saved terrible episodes. So obviously in this case, films. The scene where Picard and Shinzon have dinner leading into the scene of Picard in the Romulan Senate it's up there. It is a fabulous, fabulous scene. Because of two great actors working so well against each other, I love Shinzon's questions about, were we Picards always warriors? I like to think myself an explorer. Were we always explorers? You know, I love them finding out about each other. Shinzon's story then of growing up in the Reman mines, being cared for by the Viceroy. That works so well. But the suggestion of a Starfleet officer standing in the Romulan Senate when we know the Romulans are the oldest sort of ongoing villains in Star Trek's history, because they predate the Klingons, that is a momentous moment for Star Trek as a universe. The score is beautiful, of course it is, it's Jerry Goldsmith. Patrick Stewart is fantastic in this scene, which is why this scene, Picard and the Romulan Senate, is my dilithium up for Star Trek Nemesis. A down, though, is when Picard's looking at old pictures of himself. We know that Johnny Picard had a full head of hair when he was a young man. So all you had to do was let Tom Hardy take this picture before shaving his head. So that was a bit, again, one wonders, was this a research issue? I really like So first of all, the revelation that there's Tayloron radiation, it is bad, 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 bad beyond belief. There is no question it is the evil MacGuffin of the film. Picard and Crusher. Again, great Crusher scene, but Picard going, I so wanted to trust him, but I just can't explain this away. That's an up. These are experienced officers who listen to their gut. And that was important, that Picard was the one to say, I do not trust him, as opposed to, later on, Le Choc. And Data and Geordi identify the source of the, illegal accessing of the ship's systems. That's something they can turn to their tactical advantage. But we won't reveal it just yet. Do you remember when I explained about trilithium downs? Trilithium down, and if you've ever seen me talk about Nemesis, you know what's coming, is including the mind scene on Troy. What was the point of it, other than to show people Shinzon was bad? We know Shinzon's bad. He just orchestrated a coup d'etat against the Romulan Senate, and okay, maybe you don't think that's bad, maybe you're not pro-Romulan. That's fine, you might be a Klingon. Then all you had to do was stick to Shinzon's story of he needs Picard's blood. He is driven by desperation and this perhaps sense of conquest in the name of the downtrodden Remans. You could have done that without ever going near using to just show someone's a baddie. It's lazy, it is deeply uncomfortable, and although some might defend, well, it's meant to be uncomfortable, but it's not essential. You have to be very, very careful when using in any story, because if it's gratuitous, you have failed. And this film fails, which means it fails Troy, who did not deserve this character treatment after, 15 years of, Marina Sirtis playing the part. And when you find out as well that there's a deleted scene where there's a second assault scene as well, it gets even more uncomfortable. Some footage of that still exists in the promotional trailer for this film. Using the argument that because of her assault, Troy is able to later pinpoint the scimitar, again, that's weak as. Troy could have done that anyway. You know what I mean? It's so unnecessary. They didn't kill her, so it's not fridging, but we're talking it's the same logic. And all it does is get everyone in the one room for Picard to be beamed away. Completely unnecessary. Also, Picard refusing her any kind of compassionate time because, we're too close to Romulus, I need you here. Okay. I have a logical down. One of your crew has just been assaulted and Tayloron radiation has been detected. Why on earth weren't the shields already up? As Picard is there in the evil geneticist lab on board the Reman Scimitar, Shinzon enters and Picard goes, what is this? Why have you brought me here? I was lonely. Always loved Tom Hardy's delivery of that line. That is definitely an up. And the scene that follows where we get this sort of insight into Shinzon living this half-life. You're not Reman and I'm not quite human. So what am I? And yeah, he sells this. And it really, really does work for me, I have to say. And we get this, the argument, I'm a mirror for you too, Shinzon, not for long. B4 comes and goes. No other scene was needed in previous... Anyway, listen. Overall, this is a good scene, and it sets up the stakes. Picard's there to be vampired. Hey, did you notice they looked like Nosferatus? Right, I'm over it. And we know that a Soong-type android is aboard the Scimitar, and Shinzon's dastardly plan is to, harvest Picard's life so that he himself can continue to live. Okay, these are suitable stakes. There's one line I really want to highlight, even from that scene again, where Shinzon is basically saying, if you had lived my life, you would do this too. And Picard goes, I am not capable. And Shinzon grabs the vial of blood taken from Picard's neck and goes, you are me. Up. I do like the overall question of nature versus nurture. I'm not satisfied where it lands, but I like the question of it in this film. And also Shinzon now believes he's got access to the fleet movements of all of Starfleet. That's gonna really come in handy for him. Well, okay. I like the Data reveal. That worked. Especially when he walks in and basically grins at Picard. And I mean, like, we have to have our perfunctory Vulcan neck pinch, and we get one. So they get out of the lab. I feel bad for that, Riemann. We do, though, get the first instance of Chekhov's personal transporter. Do you think that's going to come back? I don't hate the idea, by the way. I think the technology is brilliant. It's basically like a little personal transport enhancer. So, yeah, do you know what? Up for that. Shinzon sadly falls into the completely stereotypical "you have failed me for the last time" by killing the guard. Totally unnecessary. That's not how you inspire loyalty in your men. Come on, that's just basic. Captain Picard, listen, he's a fine soldier, so he is. Even though he prefers to think of himself as an explorer. So good for him. Good for him. You know, Data, yeah, pretty good hand-eye coordination. So Remans were only assigned on the deadliest of missions in the Dominion War. Fierce warriors me arse. I have never seen such a pathetic attempt to stop two people escaping a ship. I'm not saying I didn't want them to escape, but I mean... Hello, I'm a Reman. Oh, I've been shot. Ah! Yes, I'm sure the Jem'Hadar were terrified. Also, aside from that, down action Picard in this one. Funnily enough, really worked in Star Trek First Contact. Right, credit where credit was due. I thought Patrick Stewart really did great there. In Insurrection, worked within the context of the story. But one of the key things about Insurrection, one of the things that works, was Picard saying to Rwafo, "We're getting too old for this." And I'm sorry to say that in Nemesis, everyone feels a little bit tired. And it comes across, for example, the Reman's basically lying down on the ground and going, "If you shoot me here, it'll kill me faster." There doesn't seem to be much of an effort to make anyone look as though they're particularly skilled. Picard does not seem particularly skilled. I mean, at one point himself and Data are standing by the door, having a conversation. Remans are shooting at them, but sure, don't worry about it. They've got all the accuracy of a stormtrooper. Things like this they don't paint Picard in any kind of positive light as a particularly skilled soldier either. Getting one of those Scorpion fighters after, I have to say, I do like the, Reman is an incredibly difficult language, Captain. And then, would you like me to drive? That was enough. I did enjoy that. The Scorpion blasts out of the scimitar, flies toward the Enterprise E. In fairness, Riker and Worf are on the ball. They beam it aboard just out of the range of the scimitar's tractor beam, and they warp out of there. That up to that sequence, that is an up. Down for the aesthetic choice of the Enterprise going to warp, not showing off its belly. That I love. But as it zips off, I miss the elongated nacelles. Just an aesthetic preference on my part. Shinzon quickly sets the scimitar on an intercept course, but he has a little conversation with Saran down on Romulus, who probably isn't going to last very long when Shinzon gets back. So Donatra turns around to Saran and goes, "Are you ready to have your hands drenched in blood? You know, this isn't about beating the Federation. This is about killing everyone. Can you live with that?" And I'm going to say up for the Romulans not just being stereotypical bad guys in this film. I actually really like the inclusion of this scene. I think it's quite critical. Also, do you know what? While I'm here, up for the Romulan symbol that's shown in this film. Different from the one in The Next Generation, which I love, by the way, but I really like it. And I'm going to give it up to the uniforms. I'm not sure if I prefer the ones here or in The Next Generation, but I'm gonna give them it up anyway. Crusher explains to Picard in the Ready Room what the story with Shinzon is. He was created using temporal RNA sequencing, which means basically he was designed to skip 30 years of his life. I mean, his whole reason for being was to replace Picard. He couldn't exactly walk in as a child on board the Enterprise and be like, "I'm going to take command now. I hope nobody notices." You know, he had to be the right age. And I like that despite everything, Picard's first question is, can anything be done for him? That's very Picard. Speaking then of emotional beats in the film, Data has to deactivate B4, and it's emotional. It's an up for me, this scene, because B4 is a character we've never met before this film. So a bit like, I guess, Lal in The Offspring, you have very little time, but so much suggestion. And I get that with B4. I'm gonna say, obviously because we've done our dilithium up, my latinum up for Star Trek Nemesis is Brent Spiner. I think he smashes it in this film. He actually has a story credit on the film as well. I know he had been lobbying for Data to die for a while. He was worried about aging out of the role. I really like how he handles both B4 and Data in this film. The briefing that follows in the observation lounge, that's an up, right, where we really get the scale. Failure on radiation, courses through the ship. The only thing that could be for is he's going after Earth. Down, I know how he thinks. In fairness to John Logan in the film, it's a trope of cinema. Oh, I know how he thinks because he must be me. I think it's a bit reductive. It's like we need to set the stakes, ergo he's going after Earth. You didn't have to do that. It's sort of a bit silly at this point. It's a bit redundant. You know, he's coming after them. That's the stakes. That's enough. He does, however, say that all other concerns are secondary. We have to stop the scimitar. And there is a beat where it focuses on Gates McFadden. And this is a beat that's aged way better than they knew it was going to when making this film. Because if you look at the timeline, when you take Picard season 3 into account, she is most probably pregnant in this scene with Jack Crusher. Now, they didn't know that when they were writing Star Trek Nemesis. So technically there's nothing in the film at all that suggests that she is. But what we now know is that she is probably pregnant with Jack, and she's just been told all other concerns are secondary. Maybe this is an unearned up, but it's an up. One thing that actually on the channel myself and Chris have talked about a lot is we love the like 1,000 other commanders on 1,000 other battlefields line, I wait for the dawn. That's an up. And just the whole Enterprise is getting ready for battle. Love the new weapons lockers, that looks great. Nice to see the phaser rifles back again. Yeah, I really like the tension as it ratchets up in this scene. And I really like the sort of the creepy almost stalking of the scimitar's been right behind them the whole time. I like it. I like it. I like the scene in Stellar Cartography. Down, they never realized until that moment the possibility of an ambush. But before we leave this scene, I do like the exchange where Picard is talking about Shinzon. He's worried, there but for the grace of. But Data reminds him that even if B4 was identical to him in every way, they're still not the same person. And it's just a good little reminder at this point. It's an up from me here. Now, fair's fair, the battle in the Basin Rift is actually great. The suggestion that it could have been a bit more, sure, look, budget went against it. Originally it was a fleet battle. You had other Starfleet ships, we get, the names at least of the ships on the other side of the Basin Rift. But I like what we get. There's a lot of great shots of the Enterprise E in battle, and although sometimes it's obscured, I think there's great shots of the scimitar in battle as well. Overall, I think it's shot really, really well. I love, fire, all phasers, ventral, or zero elevation. Basically, we're shooting in the dark here, seeing what we hit. Digital Domain, who did the effects for Star Trek Nemesis, I think really, really delivered on this scene in particular. There's one particular moment in the battle I want to highlight, and it's when the scimitar is firing at the dorsal section of the Enterprise E. Everyone looks up. I was always kind of creeped out by that. The scene in the ready room is an up. Again, pretty much any scene between Tom Hardy and Patrick Stewart is great in this film. We do get another exploration of, you don't need to do this, we can help you, it's too late for me. This question of nature versus nurture. Down, why is the hologram voice so crap? This is 2379. We've seen holotechnology really, really successfully work outside of here. It would then go completely rubbish both before and after this again. You know my ongoing thing with holotechnology. It was a kind of a needless bit, like lowering Worf's voice wasn't needed. Picard coming back onto the bridge and the reveal of this new Valdor warbird. Up. And that one took me a while. Initially, I was a bit like, I feel like the Doderadix class warbird would kick the crap out of the scimitar. Why not just send a couple of them? This was back in 2002, before I knew anything about digital files and things like that. But I have come to love this type of warbird. And, it's kind of a bugger that this and an appearance in Lower Decks is the only time we see it. I'd like to see it again, please. I think it looks menacing, it looks mean, it looks a bit small when you think of Romulan-sized ships, but sure, listen. And, just that scene with Denatra going, maybe be of assistance. Let's get to work. That scene works for me. There's an interesting thing here, just while it's in my head. If you look at the graphics of like the shields on the Enterprise E, like particularly on the screens, they're all using that early version of the Enterprise E that, went out to the models in First Contact before the Bussard collectors basically got their caps on them. Has anyone ever noticed that? I see you. Down. As much as I think they look great, the Valdor Warbirds were about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Yeah, they really don't last very long. The copper one, gets the wing destroyed and you get that admittedly great shot of the wing impacting with the Enterprise E's nacelle, whereas the other one, Denatra's, it's coming in on the scimitar, he drops his cloak, uses that to lure her in, fires and disables her. It looks great. What was the point? Then we get the Remember Me scene. And again, for me, it's tainted because of how we got here. I really honestly feel like Troy could have found them just by using her powers. Which are, I suppose one thing that's a carryover from the Next Generation is her powers are very inconsistent. I will give them that. The Riemann boarding party is down as well. But to be honest, that down is an extension of Fierce Warriors. Lol. We do get that absolutely brilliant scene though, where we're back on the bridge and then out of nowhere seemingly the scimitar swoops in and takes out the view screen and we lose poor Branson. Up and F for Branson. Do not wear a red shirt on this ship unless you're in the main credits. Nice to see him there for a minute. But he goes the way of Hawk and he ain't coming home again. What a scene though. Shinzon checks in to make sure Picard is still alive. Oh, still alive, still here. And then we get the other thing. So from watching the Generations Ups and Down is that I can't stand the joke, all Troy does is crash the ship. She saved people when the Enterprise D was crashing, and she does this on the orders of Picard because they fly into the scimitar in a hopeful attempt to cripple the much larger, much more powerful ship. Taken up Troy. Also taken up this overall scene because a physical model, remember at this stage now we're doing pretty much exclusively CGI, but a physical model of the Enterprise E saucer section was built for this scene in particular. And fun fact, turns up in an Enterprise episode, Regeneration. Keep an eye out at the Arctic crash site, by the way. It looks fantastic. I have always enjoyed this scene. I like the tension. This will shock you. I like the music. And yeah, it works for me. Fair play, Troy. There's sort of a rapid run through of scenes here. We have to kill off the Viceroy. We have to make it look like Riker's gonna die. A generation's final journey begins. We get Deck 29 and the Pit of Doom at the bottom of the ship. How big is Deck 29? It's just down for that pit, down for the manner of death in which the Viceroy dies, because we're just copying the Klingon Commander Krug at this point, and down as well for the immediate breaking of the transporter when Picard beams over to the scimitar, which, by the way, this is something I have to do. Trope of cinema. I have to do this. No, you don't. You don't have to do that at all. It's very silly. It reminds me of scenes like, for some reason it's reminding me of the sword guy in Indiana Jones when Indy just pulls out his gun and shoots him. Or even in Captain Marvel, where Jude Law is like, yes, just you and me, we're gonna fight. And she just uses her energy on him. Send anyone else, mate. You don't have to do this yourself. So it's logical down. And I know I kind of skipped over the whole Riker scene there, but did anyone really think they were going to kill off Riker? So unfortunately, poor Ron Perlman gets a bit of a squib ending. Down. I do like that, Picard's going to beam over and, basically any Riemann who's still there should just shoot themselves. Otherwise Picard will get them from about 4 decks and 4 right corners away. But anyway, Data's just like, yet no. And so we get that space flight scene. Up. I like it. And I like that they took the moment to, you know, Data and Geordi look at each other. This starts to feel like, oh, I see where they're going with this. Specific music cue. Up. Final flight. Jerry Goldsmith, you smashed it with this one. Love it. Picard gets to the bridge of the scimitar. There's a bit of fisticuffs. Anyway, himself and Shinzon end up at the Thalaron generator, which is just about ready. You know, we're counting down. The ship's going to envelop the Enterprise E with the Thalaron radiation. It'll all be a bad time. Down Shinzon's death. You know, they have a bit of fisticuffs, it doesn't really work out. Shinzon runs toward him, so Picard rips a metal bar off the wall and impales him with it. Doesn't run at him. No, Shinzon, to be honest, Shinzon impales himself and then pulls himself along, and there we are. I've seen people try and defend this by going, it was kind of broken already. Okay, listen, I'll allow for that. But he's still bent metal. Yeah. And then we get the really like, oh, ending for Shinzon. And he's not a likable character, you're not meant to like him. But even as a sort of a shock or surprise ending, it's a bit, oh, okay. And the Picard's standing there, shocked. Data arrives and slaps the wee little transporter thingy on him to send him away. From this moment on, the scene flips and becomes great. Like Picard's realization as to what's happening, Data's goodbye, and Data firing into the Thalaron generator, allowing the Enterprise to escape before the Genesis wave hits, allowing the scimitar to explode, and definitely not echoing any other film in the Star Trek series. Look, up for the goodbye. Brent Spiner, you did great. Thank you so much. And there we have it. You know, scimitar explodes, Picard's back on board the Enterprise E, everyone's in shock. I really do have to say, like that moment of everyone is so in shock. Picard's like, oh, the Dunatra is signaling, you know, they're about to send shuttles over, and Picard's like, they don't know our procedure. Just open the doors. And Geordi goes, I'll look after it. Because even in everything, Geordi's just lost his best friend, but he's still professional, obviously. The fact that he's caring for others, it was wonderful. This whole, yeah, well done. That's an up. The wake for Data, of course, is an up as well. And that, you know, Riker trying to remember what was the song Data was trying to whistle when they first met. You know, I'm sure a lot of people were sitting in the audience going, it was Pop Goes the Weasel, but it's still a very touching, very moving scene, which leads into that wonderful homage to the motion picture where we see the Enterprise in dry dock. And that, okay, you're starting to get lumps in the throat now. Captain Riker is about to disembark for the USS Titan. Yeah, that's an up for me, actually. Captain Riker, seeing those 4 pips finally there just feels right. They have their goodbye. A couple of deleted scenes, which I'll talk about in the Temporal Observations. And we get the ending of Picard explaining everything to B4, and B4 seemingly not getting it, not having the capacity to understand. The first line of Blue Skies, Picard joins him, and Jerry Goldsmith joins in then as well before we go to the credits. Up. Will you join me, please, at the Temporal Observations? I'll get to obviously Star Trek Picard in a moment, because Picard is effectively the next story after this. But, you know, the Romulan Senate, that's not Neral. So that Romulan, the Praetor, is not the one that we saw in both Unification, he wasn't Praetor then, but then later Inter Arma Enum Silent Legis. And speaking of the latter, the Enterprise is not the first ship to visit Romulus. The Bellerophon did it in the 7th and final season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where they were also wearing these lovely threads. Alexander Siddig suits this probably better than I do. We get shoutouts to a Tholian ambassador in the opening of this film. John Logan originally teased that there was going to be a Gorn in this film. Alas, it never came to pass, but we did get the redesigned Gorn in Star Trek Enterprise. The Titan gets its first mention here. Now, we would go on to see the Titan in Lower Decks and, of course, in Star Trek Picard. It is there in the Stargazer and Farewell, but obviously then you have the Titan A in season 3 of Picard. Wesley gets his cameo. I mentioned that, we don't really know what the state of Wesley is here, but what we then learn later in Picard season 2 and in Star Trek Prodigy is that yes, he is still with the Travelers and he is still, well, traveling. In the deleted scene, he's seen as a lieutenant junior grade who's going to go and serve on the Titan. Maybe this was his gap year. Guinan is there saying she got married 23 times. Fair play. I mentioned Nola Oksana being a down. Also, no Pulaski. I'm sure there was behind the scenes reasons, but yeah, it just feels like this would have been a perfect chance for a cameo. Alas, it didn't come to pass. Romulan ale is apparently illegal again after the end of the Dominion War. Blue Skies gets its first shout out here. That would go on to become so important in the first season of Star Trek Picard. Fun fact, the wig that Marina Sirtis wore in this film is the same wig she wears in Nepenthe in Star Trek Picard's first season. Jack Crusher. Shinzon is a clone of Picard, but there's no kind of father-son relationship there. If the timeline is to be believed, Picard season 3 is set in 2401, which is 22 years after the events of Star Trek Nemesis. There is the suggestion that Jack Crusher is in his early 20s in Picard season 3, which, Crusher basically has to be pregnant in this film for that to make sense. So, potentially, Jack Crusher's in the film, sort of. Look, we've spoken about this in the ups and downs for Picard. The timeline does not make sense. And that timeline is confirmed in Picard's first season when Picard and Data are talking about Data's death at the end of this movie. So, I guess we can all just wish really, really hard that Jack was there and maybe he got some of that temporal RNA stuff as well. All 5 then Star Trek series are repped in this film. You have DS9, well, in the fact that Worf is there, but also all of the references to the Dominion War. Voyager, you have Janeway makes a cameo. It's the cast of The Next Generation. Attack pattern Kirk Epsilon is used at one point, and the USS Archer is one of the ships that is waiting in the Basin Rift. And in fact, actually on that, the ships are the Intrepid, the Galaxy, the Valiant, the Ares, the Nova, the Hood, and the Archer. The story goes that Jeri Ryan was asked to cameo in this film, and that her appearance was basically used as a lobby, for Marina. Basically, Marina Sirtis asked for a certain amount of money for this film. She was then told, well, we'll just get Jeri Ryan to cameo to replace you. Whoever said that, not realizing that Jeri and Marina were like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. There is this ongoing thing where people just assume people don't speak to each other. Anyway, however, obviously Jeri Ryan's not in the film. And of course, another element of that is that there was also a plan for her to cameo at the Riker Troy's wedding, to which Jeri Ryan said, why would I be there? I don't know any of these people. The Reman uniforms would see use again in Star Trek Enterprise's 3rd season as the uniforms for the Xindi reptilians. Shinzon's knife is called the Jackal. It was designed by Gil Hibben, and it has appeared in quite a few movie productions. In fact, I recognise it as Faith's knife from the 3rd season of Buffy. It also appeared in the 4th season, but of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. B4, well, B4 physically appears in the first episode of Star Trek Picard, although he's disassembled at that point. There's quite a few different branches that B4's story went off in. So the one in Star Trek Picard, for example, was that Bruce Maddox and Alton Inigo Sung were able to rebuild Data's consciousness from a single neuron, suggesting that the memory download worked. And although B4's neural net was not sophisticated enough to handle it, they were able to rebuild a version of Data from that. And that becomes obviously a large plot point in the first season of Star Trek Picard. In the Countdown comic, which preceded Star Trek 09, you get the suggestion that actually the memory transfer did take, and Data returned in the body of B4. I suppose if we just go by what we see on screen, B4 is introduced here, and the last version of B4, if you like, we see at the end of the episode The Bounty in Picard's 3rd season, when this golem in which Data and Lore and Lal and B4 exist, and AI Sung, ha 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 ha, oh Noonian. That seems to be like the last kind of nod to B4, but it was nice that it wasn't such a throwaway character. Picard touring the ship before the battle, screaming reference to Best of Both Worlds, an old tradition, or as Guinan points out, seems like that's a tradition before a hopeless battle. The original script, which leaked online, which is never a good thing, but one positive thing came out of it. There was originally a line after Riker kicks the Viceroy to his death. Remember, Remans don't like the light. That Riker was going to quip, "Don't worry, hell is dark." Frakes hated the line. He hated it. He thought Riker would never do that. He wouldn't gloat over somebody dying. And so he really didn't want to say the line. When the script leaked, that line in particular was reviled, and thankfully it was cut from the film. It does, however, remain in the novelization. The ending of the film is the Wrath of Khan. I mean, listen, it's fine. You know, you can do character sacrifice, but it's the Wrath of Khan. And the fact that Data, I think it's even more so the fact that Data transferred his memories to B4 first. Search for Spock. And the toast to absent friends, you know, Kirk toasts to absent friends in the Search for Spock as well. It's all just a little bit close. A couple of important deleted scenes. One is Commander Martin Madden, the new first officer of the Enterprise E. If you haven't seen that scene, it's good fun. Go check that out. Yeah, Riker has a bit of fun with him before he goes. We get seatbelts finally installed on starships, in which I learned that that new seat is the seat from Enterprise, which I thought was good fun. And we get the reveal of where Crusher went. She went to become the head of Starfleet Medical, and she invites Picard for dinner in a deleted scene as well. Gates was done dirty. All of this then combines for a film that disappointed at the box office, it disappointed in the reviews, and sadly it led to the cancellation of any proposed fifth and final Next Generation era film. There was apparently, according to Patrick Stewart, there was a plan for a fifth film that John Logan and Brent Spiner were going to work on together. Now remember, although old Yellow Eyes had hung up his positronic net, B4 was still sitting there, so there is still the possibility that we could have had a Spock-like revivification. It didn't do great. In terms of the box office, in fact, I think it sits at the bottom of all of the Star Trek films, which is not a great place to sit, and it effectively scuppered any more film plans for that universe. Now, when you combine that with what happened with Enterprise not that long afterwards, and that show getting cancelled, it leads us to the end of the so-called Berman era of Star Trek. Around the time you can see contemporaneous reviews going, get rid of Rick Berman, get rid of Brannon Braga, who was not involved in this film in any way, but he was involved in Enterprise. It leads to a bit of a, at that time, sad ending for the franchise, because, oh man, this had been like, I mean, we'd had Star Trek consistently for, what, 15? By the time Enterprise goes off the air, about 17 years of consistent Star Trek, which is just unceremoniously brought to a close. There was auctions, everything was sold off. I mean, they'd already dismantled the Voyager sets, which is, by the way, why Sickbay, for example, is unique in this film, you know, because they had to build it because they had used Voyager Sickbay for the last two. And yeah, everything was gone. The lights were off. Thanks very much. Don't call us. It was an ignominious end to Star Trek. So when news reached our ears of a new film that would arrive 7 years later, did it deliver or not? Find out next week when we go through all the ups and downs for Star Trek, directed by J.J. Abrams, released in 2009. That's everything, folks. Thank you so much for watching along. You are awesome. You are wonderful. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment. If you didn't enjoy it, leave a comment. That's the joy of it all. We just appreciate you being here. Please follow us on the various socials. We are at TrekCulture, at TrekCultureYT on Instagram. I am at Sean Ferry. Chris is at EditChrisEdit. Yous are all lovely. Live long and prosper. Thanks very much.